So I consider this to be sort of like a job interview, and I'm going to conduct it in that sort of a manner.
Right.
My first question is, why should I fire Ron Wyden and replace him with you?
Well, I think Ron White and I have fundamentally different philosophies about the role of government and the role that government can play in creating jobs and the level of intrusion into private lives that's appropriate. So I think Wyden and I it may pose a clear choice, and I think mine is the better choice because it's more friendly to individual freedom and individual liberty, and I think those values are what are critical to a thriving economy, not to mention to personal happiness and personal satisfaction.
Okay. So why are you running for U.S. Senate?
I think mostly out of frustration and displeasure with what I've seen in Washington D.C. over particularly the last couple of years, but really much longer than that. I don't attribute it all to the Democrats. I think the Republicans have their share of the blame. They certainly started us down a path of big spending and sort of lost track of their fiscal responsibility principles, I believe. So it's really a sense that I think we need fundamental change in Washington, and I think I have something to contribute to that effort.
And what would that be?
Well, my experiences as a law professor and the CEO basically of the law school for 13 years. I was a dean, and at Lewis and Clark, at least, that means really running the place from the financial side to the marketing side to the academic side. So I think I have an understanding of the private sector. It is a private law school. But I also, and maybe more importantly, have a real understanding of a lot of policy issues. That's what I've spent 37 years writing about and thinking about. And so I think I have a lot to contribute to how we solve a lot of the existing problems that we face.
Okay. Just as a follow-up on that question, what kind of policy issues have caught your interest over the years? What have you written about?
Well, probably the things I've written the most about are natural resource related issues. So public lands, timber, oil and gas mining, water issues. I've taught water law. I've written a lot about water law. And issues relating to property and the role of property in a market economy and the importance of that to a thriving economy. And I also have taught tort law for a long time. And so I've thought a lot about the role of the tort system, how it impacts the economy, the need for various kinds of tort reform, in my opinion. And I've taught constitutional law and written a lot about constitutional law. And I think today, more than ever, and certainly in the last century, there's a real need to think about the proper role of the federal government and the impact that the expanding federal power has, not just on state powers, but on individual freedom.
Okay. Going back to something you just said here, you've written about the importance of private property to the economy. Could you expand on that?
Well, I think any economy, a market economy, is based upon two essential legal mechanisms. One is property, and the other is contract. So whatever kind of a business deal you and I may make, we're going to enter into some kind of a contractual relationship that says, here's what you're going to do and here's what I'm going to do. And if we enter into that without the confidence that it's going to be enforced, we're both going to have a different attitude about whether or not we're willing to do this. And often in those contractual relationships, whether I'm buying something at your store or you and I are agreeing that you're going to build my home or whatever the economic transaction is, we're often also dealing in property rights. The things that we're trading, the things that you're buying and I'm selling or vice versa, are defined by property. And if those property rights aren't secure, then if you're the purchaser and I'm the seller, you can't count on getting what you purchase. So property and contract are fundamental to any market economy.
Can I infer from your statements then that you feel like property rights and contract law have been usurped or manipulated?
I think, yes, I think certainly property rights have been gradually eroded, I would say, over the last, certainly since the New Deal, and the idea that government has more and more authority to regulate and limit the use of private property rights makes those private property rights less secure. And I think the same is true with contract issues, because as government regulations expand, expand, they basically put limits on the ability of you and I to enter into agreements. I'm not arguing against any kind of regulation. I think we need regulation for a lot of different reasons, but I think we've tended to way over-regulate and ignore the constitutional protections of contract and property rights.
Okay, and then you mentioned tort reform. What kind of examples can you give me of things that need to be?
Well, I think that the most obvious context in recent policy debates is with respect to the healthcare reform, because the bill that was enacted does nothing to deal with tort reform. And now, tort reform has to happen ultimately at the state level, so it's not something that Congress can totally resolve, but Congress can certainly give the states a lot of incentives to engage in tort reform. And the problem with the existing tort system with respect to healthcare is that it drives up the cost of health services by leading doctors to practice what's called defensive medicine. They're protecting themselves against lawsuits, so they're doing a lot of procedures that they don't need to do, they shouldn't do, that aren't cost effective. And there's a lot of other parts of the economy that are affected in the same way. You can look at, for example, the manufacturing of airplanes, small airplanes. A lot of companies were basically driven out of business because of the threat of lawsuits. And that's true. Even when companies aren't put out of business, it drives the cost of products up because companies have to anticipate that they're going to get sued.